They say hindsight is 20/20ths. That once everything falls apart, you can look back and pinpoint the exact moment when the cracks began to form. But when you're living it, you don't see them. You tell yourself it's just stress, just life, just a rough patch. That's what I told myself about Mira. We met in college, and from the start, she had this fire in her, a mix of ambition and charm that made people gravitate toward her. I was no exception. We built something real, or at least I thought it was real. We had a home in a quiet suburb, careers that kept us comfortable. Mine in cybersecurity, hers in corporate marketing, and a group of friends who looked at us like we were the ideal couple. I had no reason to believe otherwise. But perfection has a way of hiding rot. At first, the changes were subtle, things you wouldn't think twice about unless you were paying attention. She became more independent, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was a different kind of independence. Not the kind where someone is growing, exploring new interests, or building a better version of themselves. No, this was the kind that eroded the foundation of a partnership. She stopped waiting for me to have dinner together, something we'd always done. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe work had been stressful. But then it became a pattern. I ate earlier, she'd say casually when I asked. Or worse, I wasn't that hungry. She started going out more, but not with the people we both knew. She dropped the names of co-workers I'd never heard of before. When I asked questions, she'd shrug them off. Just some work friends, she'd say dismissively. You wouldn't know them. And maybe that's when I should have known something was wrong. Not because she was making new friends, but because she was hiding them from me. Our conversations changed, too. We used to talk about everything, our dreams, our frustrations, our ridiculous inside jokes that made no sense to anyone but us. That slowly faded into silence. Then the silence turned into something worse, small talk. How was work? Busy. Anything interesting happened today? Not really. It was like we had turned into strangers, living under the same roof, sharing the same space, but completely disconnected. The thing is, when you love someone, you make excuses for them. You tell yourself that relationships go through ups and downs, that you're just overthinking things. I did that for months. I forced myself to believe that nothing had changed, even when the signs were right in front of me. But some things are impossible to ignore. It was a Tuesday night, and Mira was sitting on the couch, curled up with her phone. She was smiling, one of those small, private smiles you give when you're talking to someone who makes your heart race. I was sitting across from her, watching her, something twisting in my gut. "What's so funny?" I asked. She glanced up at me, startled, like she had forgotten I was even in the room. Then, just as quickly, she locked her phone and placed it face down on the table. "Just memes," she said with a little laugh, waving her hand like it was nothing. A lie. It was in the way her shoulders tensed slightly, the way she reached for her drink too quickly, the way she avoided my eyes for just a fraction of a second too long. I could have asked more. I could have pressed her, but I didn't. Instead, I forced a smile, nodded, and looked away, because the truth was too terrifying to face. That night, I lay awake in bed while Mira slept beside me, her back turned, her breathing even and steady. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I tried to remember the last time she had looked at me the way she looked at her phone earlier. I tried to remember the last time she had laughed at something I said. It had been a long time. I wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that we were going through a rough patch that would pass with time. But deep down, something inside me knew better. Marriages don't crumble overnight. They erode slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you wake up and realize there's nothing left to save. And in that moment, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, I had the sinking feeling that my marriage was already gone. For weeks, I lived in a strange limbo, half aware, half ignorant. I knew something was wrong. I felt it every time Mira avoided my gaze, every time she went out without inviting me, every time her phone screen lit up and she tilted it just slightly away from my view. But I still didn't want to believe it, because once you acknowledge the truth, there's no going back. So, I kept lying to myself. I told myself that she was just busy with work, that we were just going through a rough patch, that I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that she wouldn't betray me. But the mind can only suppress reality for so long before it forces you to confront it. The first real crack, one I couldn't ignore, came on a Saturday afternoon. We were out at a new cafe downtown, one Mira had insisted we try. She was in an unusually cheerful mood that day, smiling, laughing, leaning in close like she used to. And for a moment, I let myself believe that this was a turning point, that maybe I had been wrong, that we were reconnecting. Then she said it. "I've been thinking," she began, twirling the stem of her wine glass between her fingers. I looked up from my plate, surprised at her tone. It was light, almost too casual, like she was about to suggest a vacation. "Maybe we should try an open marriage." The words hung in the air, sharp as knives. I froze, my fork suspended in midair. I was sure I had misheard. "What?" "You know," she said, waving a hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We've been together for so long. It's natural to want to explore other experiences." She took a sip of her wine. "I think it could be good for us." "For us." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. My mind was racing, searching for any possible explanation that didn't mean what I thought it meant. But there wasn't one. She wasn't suggesting this for us. She was already seeing someone. She was already cheating, and she wanted my permission. When I finally found my voice, it was hoarse and unsteady. "Are you saying you want to cheat on me?" Mira laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. "It's not cheating if we both agree to it," she said, tilting her head as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Besides, no one owns anyone. I'm my own person, and so are you." The words hit me like a slap. Ownership. That's what she thought this was about? As if I had ever tried to control her? As if asking for loyalty, for commitment, for the same love and respect I had given her made me possessive? I felt something shift inside me. A cold, creeping understanding. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the Mira who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms, who used to text me silly jokes in the middle of the day, who used to talk about growing old together. That Mira was gone. I wanted to yell. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know how she could sit there, smiling, acting as though she hadn't just ripped out the foundation of our marriage with a single sentence. But all I could do was stare at the stranger across the table. She leaned forward then, her tone softening, as if she were trying to sell me on a new gadget instead of shattering our relationship. "Think about it," she said. "It could be freeing. We'd still have each other, just without the pressure. It's what a lot of modern couples do." Her phone buzzed on the table. A message. She glanced at it quickly before flipping it face down. She didn't move fast enough. I caught the flash of a name on the screen, Zane, and I saw the small smile she tried to hide. A smile meant for someone else. That's when I knew. She wasn't asking for an open marriage. She was asking for permission to continue whatever she had already started. That night, I barely slept. Mira acted as if nothing had happened. She lay in bed beside me, scrolling through her phone while I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought about the way she had smiled at that message, the way she had so casually suggested dismantling our marriage as if she were discussing weekend plans. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been avoiding for months. Maybe there was nothing left to save. Maybe the love I had fought so hard to protect had already died. And maybe, just maybe, she never deserved it in the first place. The days after Myra's open marriage proposal were the longest of my life. She carried on as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't casually suggested shattering everything we had built together, as if her late nights, her secretive behavior, and her dismissive attitude toward me were just normal parts of any marriage. I, on the other hand, felt like I was trapped in a slow-motion car crash. Every moment near her was suffocating. Every word she spoke felt hollow. I kept replaying that lunch in my head, trying to convince myself I had misread the situation. That maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth salvaging. But the truth has a way of demanding to be seen. And when I finally opened my eyes, I realized it had been staring me in the face all along. For years, I had never once invaded Myra's privacy. I had always believed that trust was the cornerstone of a strong marriage. That if you had to snoop through your partner's phone, the relationship was already dead. But Mira had already smashed that trust to pieces. And so, one night, when she left her phone charging in the kitchen and went to take a shower, I made my move. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I told myself that I wasn't looking for anything specific, that I would only check if something fell off. It took less than 10 seconds for my world to implode. There it was, a message thread with Zane. Explicit, intimate, detailed, inside jokes, conversations that stretched back months, plans to meet up, and then the message that nearly made me throw up. Can't wait to see you this weekend. He's getting clingy again, so I need the escape. Escape. That's what I was to her. Not her partner. Not her husband. A prison she wanted to run from. I put the phone down slowly, my vision blurring. My chest was tight, my breath short. I wanted to scream, to break something, to march into the bathroom and confront her, to demand how she could do this to me. But I didn't, because Mira didn't deserve to know how deeply she had wounded me. Not yet. The confrontation. The next evening, I waited. Mira was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. I took a deep breath and spoke. "Who's Zane?" She froze. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was there, the unmistakable flicker of panic in her eyes. Then, as if flipping a switch, she forced herself to relax, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" I held up my own phone. "I know everything." Her body stiffened. Everything. The texts. The meetups. The lies. My voice was calm, steady, deadly. "So, just admit it." Her face hardened, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down. "So what?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "You're not my owner. I can do what I want." I felt something inside me snap. "Your husband," I corrected, my voice low and sharp. "The man you vowed to be faithful to. Or did you forget that part?" She rolled her eyes. Rolled her eyes. "This is why I suggested an open marriage," she said, exasperated. "You're so controlling. You think just because we're married, I owe you something." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity. "Owe me something?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean basic respect? Loyalty? Honesty?" She scoffed. "God, you're so dramatic. People have affairs all the time. It's not a big deal." I exhaled slowly, my hands clenching into fists. I had loved this woman. I had built my life around her. And she was sitting there, acting like she hadn't just obliterated everything we had. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the words that had been forming in the back of my mind since the moment I saw that text. "I want a divorce." The last straw. Mira blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "What?" "You heard me." I stood up, looking down at her. "I'm done. You can have your freedom, Mira. Enjoy it." She scoffed again, trying to mask her uncertainty with arrogance. "You're making a mistake, you know that? You'll regret this." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Mira," I said, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. "The only mistake I made was loving you." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit with the weight of her own choices. Filing for divorce wasn't easy. It meant untangling years of finances, property, and memories. It meant answering questions from friends and family, most of whom had no idea what had been happening behind closed doors. It meant watching the life I had built with Mira burn to the ground. But the hardest part? She barely fought it. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even try to make amends. She signed the papers with a detached expression, as if our marriage had been nothing more than a business contract she had lost interest in. I had given her everything, and in the end, I had meant nothing to her. But as I walked out of that courthouse, divorce finalized, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, yes. The anger, the betrayal, the loss. But so was something else. Freedom. I had spent months, maybe years, fighting for a marriage that had died long ago. Now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting anymore. I was free. And Mira? She was about to realize that her so-called freedom wasn't all she thought it would be. Because karma was coming for her. And it wouldn't be kind. Divorce didn't break Mira. At least, not at first. In the beginning, she seemed unaffected, almost indifferent. She moved out of our house within a week, settling into a sleek downtown apartment. The kind of place people who chase excitement but lack stability go to feel alive. From what I heard, she wasted no time flaunting her new life. She was always out, new bars, new parties, new people. And Zane? He was exactly what I expected. A thrill, an escape. But just like every high, it didn't last. Whispers of chaos. At first, I tried to block her out. I focused on work, on rebuilding myself, on remembering what it felt like to be whole again. But the city wasn't big enough to keep her completely out of my orbit. Mutual friends started dropping little tidbits here and there, casual comments that hinted at the chaos unraveling behind Myra's confident exterior. She's been hitting the party scene hard. She's been hanging around some questionable people. She doesn't seem happy, man. Not really. I pretended not to care. Shrugged it off. But deep down, a part of me wanted to know just how far she would fall. Rock bottom knocks twice. It wasn't long before the cracks in her new life started to show. First, there was a job situation. Mira had always been ambitious, sharp, a corporate climber. But something shifted after the divorce. She started slacking at work, missing deadlines, showing up late, making excuses. Then came the rumors. One of our mutual friends, Karen, who still worked in the same industry as Mira, pulled me aside one day. "You heard what happened, right?" she asked. I shook my head. "She got fired." I blinked. "Wait, fired?" "Mira." Karen nodded. "Yeah. Word is she started screwing around with some client. Her boss found out, and it got ugly. They didn't want the scandal, so they gave her a severance package and told her to disappear." I didn't know whether to laugh or shake my head. Mira, the woman who once called me controlling for expecting basic loyalty, had sabotaged herself. But that was just the beginning. The breaking point. It was a cold October evening when I saw her again. I was grabbing coffee at a small shop downtown when I heard a familiar voice. Too familiar. I turned toward the window, and there she was. Mira, but not the polished, confident woman I had once loved. She looked different, disheveled, tired, like someone who had been running from something for too long and finally realized there was no escape. She was arguing with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, built like a bouncer, and visibly pissed off. I stayed inside, watching as the conversation escalated. Mira kept shaking her head, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The man, however, wasn't having it. He gestured aggressively, his voice rising. People on the sidewalk started noticing. And then, out of nowhere, he grabbed her wrist. It wasn't violent, but it was forceful, enough to make her stumble back. Something in me twisted. I should have looked away, should have walked out the back door, ignored her like she had ignored me. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped outside. "Everything okay here?" The man turned to me, sizing me up. Mira, upon realizing who I was, stiffened. For a second, I thought she might speak, might say something to acknowledge me. But she didn't. She just lowered her gaze, silent. The guy let go of her wrist and scoffed before walking away, muttering something under his breath. I turned to Mira. "You good?" She swallowed hard, nodded quickly. "Yeah, just a misunderstanding." I didn't believe her, but I also didn't ask, because she wasn't my problem anymore. I nodded once and walked past her, disappearing into the crowd. The tipping point. A few weeks later, I woke up to a notification that made my stomach drop. A news article. Local businessman arrested in drug bust. 2 others detained for questioning. My gut told me before my eyes did. I clicked the link, and there it was, a name that had once meant everything to me. Mira Khan, questioned in connection with an alleged money laundering scheme tied to an underground drug ring. The article detailed how the DEA had been investigating Zane for months. He wasn't just some random guy she had fallen for. He was involved in something much darker. And Mira? She had gotten herself caught in the crossfire. For the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt nothing. Mira had done this to herself. She had destroyed everything. Our marriage, her job, her reputation, her future. All for a man who saw her as nothing more than a disposable pawn. It took years for me to realize she had never truly loved me. But it had taken her even less time to realize that Zane didn't love her either. And now she was alone. The same way she had left me. Karma has a way of catching up with people. Sometimes it takes years. Other times, it moves swiftly, hitting like a freight train with no warning. For Mira, it happened in the blink of an eye. The fallout from her arrest spread fast. The local news picked up the story, splashing her name across headlines. Social media wasn't kind either. Screenshots of her mugshot circulated, accompanied by a flood of comments from people who once admired her. A woman who had once prided herself on being untouchable was now defined by a single, damning moment. And this time, she had no one to blame but herself. The trial. Mira wasn't officially charged at first. The authorities had focused on Zane, who was the real target of the investigation. But she wasn't innocent either. Her involvement was clear. She had helped him launder money, move shipments, and keep up the facade of a respectable life. Whether she had done it out of love, desperation, or sheer stupidity didn't matter. The evidence was undeniable. Still, she tried to spin a different story. She played the victim. She claimed she had no idea what Zane was involved in, that she had been manipulated. But the prosecutors had more than enough to counter her lies. Witness statements, transaction records, even messages between her and Zane, where she had not only acknowledged what they were doing, but had actively helped strategize how to avoid getting caught. The judge wasn't buying it. When the sentence was finally handed down, the courtroom was silent. 25 years. No parole. That was it. The confident, fearless woman who once laughed in my face about loyalty, about commitment, about consequences, was now just another inmate in a federal prison. Closure. I didn't feel joy when I saw her fall. I didn't feel sorrow either. I just felt relief. She had burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship that mattered, and thrown away everything for an illusion of freedom. And now, she was locked away, living a reality she never could have imagined for herself. Meanwhile, I had moved on. I had rebuilt my life, my career, my sense of self. I was in a new relationship. Claire, a woman who was everything Mira wasn't. Loyal, honest, kind. She had no interest in games, no need for reckless thrills. She was simply real, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally found peace. The final letter. Months passed before I heard from Mira again. One day, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting I hadn't seen in a long time. I debated whether to open it. Part of me wanted to toss it away, let it rot like she had let our marriage rot. But curiosity won. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, filled with words I had no desire to hear. She apologized. She wrote about how she had lost everything, how she regretted the choices she had made. She blamed Zane, the justice system, her own recklessness, anything but herself. And at the very end, one final plea. I don't expect you to help me, but please don't hate me. I stared at the words for a long time. Then, without hesitation, I folded the letter and tossed it into the trash. Hate her? No, I didn't hate her. I felt nothing for her at all. And that, more than anything, was the true ending to our story. She was trapped in the wreckage of her own making. And I was free.